Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Startup Genome Global Webinar Series. For today's topic, we are going to be covering how your tech ecosystem can be successful in attracting tomorrow's unicorns. And as always, we have our two sessions, our London time, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., which we had earlier today, and our 8 a.m., 9 a.m. San Francisco time, this time now. The agenda. So first, we'll be starting off with a brief introduction of the webinar and the organizations, then moving into how your tech ecosystem can be successful in attracting tomorrow's unicorns, hearing the impact of this, and then an open questions and answers discussion session. So first off, the introduction and the purpose of our ecosystem development series is to highlight specific tangible topics for startup ecosystem acceleration. We at Startup Genome aim to explain a bit about how we conduct this, as well as our partners. And as always, we want to hear your feedback. We want to hear more about the topics that are of most interest to you. Previous topics include funding policy to support startups and scale-ups during COVID-19, multiplying ecosystem growth and policy impact, a data-driven assessment and prioritization of gaps to build your ecosystem strategy, and many more that can all be rewatched on the Startup Genome YouTube channel. And as a reminder, as always, everyone who is a part of this webinar will receive the slides and the recording after the webinar within 24 hours. In terms of the future topics that we're very excited about, the next is using a cloud-based data platform to track and support your startup ecosystem. We're excited to have our guest speaker, Joran Wingard, founder and CEO of Dealroom, on April 6th. So for today's session, it's a great pleasure to have our Head of Ecosystem Strategy, Stephan Costa, here based in London, Arno Nijhof, Director of Ecosystems at the Next Web based in Amsterdam, and Roger Costa, Deputy Director of FDI Promotion at Catalonia Trade and Invest. So without further ado, I would like to pass it on to first off Stephan, followed by Arno, and then Roger. On to you, Stephan.
Adam, thanks very much, and a very good morning. Good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks so much for joining what we believe is a highly pertinent, highly important discussion at this point in time. Maybe allow me just a minute of introduction. Who are we at Startup Genome? We started life about 10 years ago as a research company seeking to understand and to model the performance of startup ecosystems, the very functioning of startup ecosystems, and to put these functionalities and mechanics into a data model that really explains how startup ecosystems can be built, accelerated, how gaps can be identified and improved. And we've over the years kind of developed that into still a research company, but also a policy advisory firm that today consults about 100 different places in the world, 40 plus governments, all of which are obviously looking at getting to the next level of the startup ecosystem and all the positive economic effects, job creation effects, etc. that entails. Global network, something we are really proud of. That's not about us, it's about all of you people, leaders in government, leaders in ecosystem initiatives to come together in a global network and to share experiences, to exchange ideas, concepts, their successes, celebrate successes together, but most importantly also to share within a private conversation, obviously, the very failures they have had, because we can learn a lot from policy failures, from initiatives that haven't worked out, and try to improve them. This webinar series is an extension of the network, trying to make that knowledge and this peer knowledge even more broadly available in the discussion, more broad. So I'm delighted to have Roger from Barcelona, from Catalonia with us today, and of course Arno from TNW, our longstanding partner, with whom we work for many years. So yeah, without further ado, Arno, please introduce yourself.
Hey, Stephan, thanks for the nice intro. So my name is Arno, and I work for the Next Web, and let me also introduce the Next Web a little bit. So we were founded 15 years ago as a small media company, grown to one of the largest in Europe. Also, we really start to write about tech. So alongside with the tech crunches of this world, becoming one of the most influential blogs out there. If you go to the next slide, you can also see that we're doing co-working spaces in Amsterdam. And I'm personally leading all the ecosystem and corporate innovation initiatives that we run. And maybe also good to mention that last year we got acquired by the Financial Times, so really now being part of that family as well. And so there are basically a couple of things where we always help ecosystems with. So we had last year we had around 60 delegations from local ecosystems, national ecosystems coming to our annual event. We're talking about today about soft landing. So that's programs that we run often. We help municipalities or ministries with innovating themselves. As we write about tech, we brand a lot of ecosystems and we get ecosystems in touch with investors. That's what we do in a nutshell. We've done that for already quite some ecosystems in the past years. Not going to dwell on this. It's good to give you an idea. And maybe one case that I want to highlight is we worked with Korea, and we started there with basically welcoming 34 companies at our annual event. And then we started also helping their soft landing program to attract companies from Europe. And we be quite successful in that. So that also, LK Startup Grand Challenge was one of the first successful soft landing programs, or to some extent successful, but that really sparked the interest of many other governments to start working on it. And from there on, we started to also write and showcase the success of the ecosystem a bit, also together with the Financial Times this year. So
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's TW in a nutshell. Here you go, Stephan. You can take it
Perfect.
back.
Thank you. You got a great case here actually about building a scale-up segment and attracting scale-up talent with the example you just showed us on the screen. But I want to move it over to Roger for a very brief introduction. So glad to have you from Barcelona, which we know for many years as one of the exciting centers of tech in Europe.
Thank you, Stephan. Thank you, Adam. Thanks a lot, Startup Genome, for the invitation. Hello, everybody. It is absolutely a pleasure to be part of this open discussion session. Before explaining you in a minute what is Catalonia Trade and Investment, let me give you an overview of what is Catalonia. Catalonia is a region in Spain, in the northeast of Spain, and we are a Spanish powerhouse in terms of industry, commercial activity, and innovation. We were having a commercial relationship with the Mediterranean zone more than 7 centuries ago. We were leading the Industrial Revolution in Spain in the 18th century, and currently we have an important mix of industry and innovation that makes us an important destination for foreign investors. We have been named and awarded by Financial Times as the best southern region for foreign investment for 6 years. For instance, Barcelona has been named recently as the second most important city in Europe in terms of tech projects attraction. So having said that, let me give you as well an overview of our agency. We are a public government agency devoted to assisting companies to be more present globally. So devoted to support Catalan companies to be internationalized. We also support Catalan companies to innovate and to do technology transfer with the world, and the other way around, having technology cooperation with other companies abroad. And third, we have this role of foreign investment attraction. So we understand the competitiveness with these three angles, or with these three perspectives. And what we always try is to be absolutely meeting the real requests and attending and assisting the real needs of the companies. And that's why we have our most important tool, which is these 40 international offices spread over the world, covering more than 100 markets, and trying to find day by day the best solutions and services for the foreign companies. We have been doing the same for 35 years, and what we are trying now is to have a specific approach for startups, because when it comes to invite foreign startups to Barcelona and to Catalonia, we want to have the proper solutions and the proper support for them, and that's there where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. And first of all, I think it's really important you mentioned the 40 offices, the global connectedness, the fabric of relationships you are building. That's what we've always been doing in international trade, but also the second angle, startup scale-up attraction is different. The factors are different, the things we need to look at. So that's great to hear, and I'm sure we'll dive into the detail in a few moments. Yeah, in the following, that's our discussion topic. How can we successfully attract tomorrow's unicorns? And I would extend it also a little bit coming from our morning discussion. So there might also be a few ideas for us for that. In terms of organic build of scale-ups, it might be a little bit of a mix, but of course we want to stay on the straight and narrow and talk about foreign attraction and bringing more of this knowledge, of this expertise and that business into our locations. Setting the scene with only a few numbers, us being Startup Genome, you would expect if you researched numbers and peer comparisons to set the scene properly. Startup economy continues to grow, unsurprisingly, 2.8 trillion last year in value. That's the value of a G7 economy. So that's the message to policymakers, but in particular, this is not a cottage industry anymore. This is a major economic factor. I'm sitting here in London, and I believe our national statistics show the startup ecosystem at about 10% of GDP contribution. So this is a very major economic factor. In many countries, that message obviously has been heard, and that's an important one. If you move to the next very quickly. Yeah, looking a little bit at where we are, pandemic, upcoming recession, no surprises, we can all see that. We take a look back and try to put into perspective the importance of a startup and a scale-up ecosystem, a segment in a national economy, in a regional economy, in a moment of crisis. And what we see here is the recovery in terms of job creation after the last financial crisis in 2009-10 with US-American data. Similarly, I could see these developments here firsthand in the UK. Startup ecosystems, tech innovation has proven to be a very effective means of innovating ourselves out of crisis, in creating new job opportunities, new business opportunities, even in recession. And unsurprisingly, we are getting many calls these days from many places in the world where politicians, policymakers, economic development are looking at this opportunity and trying to jump on the bandwagon in order to have these opportunities and fight what we all expect as a recessive tendency over the next 12 to 24 months. Okay, moving on a little bit to the next, please, Adam. Thank you. If you could go to the next. Thank you very much. Yeah, also interesting fact, but I believe it's really eye-opening. When you look into ecosystems or environments that were traditionally strong in tech innovation, Taiwan, Seoul, Korea needs mentioning. In the 80s, 90s, this was traditional R&D, but highly effective. They were the leaders in semiconductors, in telecoms equipment, etc., in technological development. And since have slowed down, and who has sped up? It's really these ecosystems, these environments, the Silicon Valley, Toronto, Vancouver, that we would call ambidextrous. So both hands coming together, great research, great R&D capability, intellectual capability at universities and research centers. And on the other hand side, these agile entrepreneurs that really can take a concept, an idea from a lab to market, trial it and scale it to a successful company. That's where we see the future of R&D, of tech innovation heading, and our scale-up companies play such an important role in taking these innovations, not only out of the lab, but to a global market where it is good for commercial and societal use. So that's really encouraging to see, and makes the case even stronger for what we do in startup ecosystem curation. Having said that, startup ecosystems, we find them all around the world. There's not a city mayor not talking about a startup segment. At least I'm not aware of anyone. But what remains highly concentrated still is the concentration of scale-up companies. They happen, and scale-ups defined as not unicorns as in the title of this webinar, but rather as companies above 50 million in valuation, 100 million in valuation, where a company really starts to scale and address international markets, creates jobs at a considerable rate. This is limited to very few places in the world. You can see the top 20 here, and they haven't changed very much over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Startup ecosystems have developed, scale-up segments not that much, and here we want to really dive into that and see what can you do. You got a startup ecosystem around you. How can you drive, but also how can you attract these scaling companies that are so important for many reasons to the ecosystem? Maybe let's have a look into 1 or 2 factors, and then we moved a little bit on. One example from our clients where we did a bit of modeling, Vision 2025, where can we get within 4 or 5 years if we create locally more scale-up companies, but also attract some? What are the job creation figures? And what we can see here is if you don't do anything, they will create about 1,600 jobs in the next 4 years in their startups. If we have the right policy measures and initiatives that help us create more local, but also to attract more foreign scale-up companies into that environment, it's an aggressive but realistic growth scenario. We'll have about 12,500 direct jobs created and indirect for the economy. So all the services, etc., that come with the scale-up segment, it's going to be nearly 100,000 jobs. And these are aggressive numbers, but they are not unrealistic. We've really stress tested that model. Just to give you a feeling for what's the impact of what we are talking about. If we move to the next slide from my end, please. Yeah, when we talk to cities, regions, there's always the presumption that attracting scale-ups from abroad, but also building them at home, is a function of late-stage funding, large A+, B, C, D rounds. I think we would like, from our research, like to debunk that factor and that myth a little bit. From our perspective, it is founder ambition, the right mindset, connectedness to top ecosystems around the world, this fabric of knowledge that still sits in the more mature ecosystems, and access to growth talent and the attraction of growth talent that quite probably are much more relevant, as they all influence directly the quality of the scale-up companies that you either build or attract. And in the end, it is the quality of the companies and their business case that makes for late-stage funding. International VC is agile enough not to look for location only, but will find the best and will invest. So from our perspective, it's a multivariate compound factor, not just a discussion about late-stage funding, as we hear it way too many times. That should it be from my side. And I think, Roger, you would, no, apologies, it's Arno actually taking us into the first part of the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Stephan, again. So basically what we did is we looked a little bit into the various parts of growth where you can be as an ecosystem, and looked a little bit like, if you start attracting companies, what do you need to set in place first? So within TNW, we defined 3 growth stages. So you have the MVP part where you look really into data, into defining strategy, assessing strengths and weaknesses. Second part is that you really start investing in the foundation, making sure that all the vehicles for growth are set up. And then you actually start into the growth, getting into the growth phase. And there, global connectiveness, I think the startup Genome mentioned that term quite often. It's really about, okay, so we have all the assets in place to start growing. Now what? You start doing international event strategy, you start building networks peer-to-peer with other cities around the world. And you also start attracting companies because you know that your ecosystem, the fundament, is ready to have a good proposition for companies that are a little bit further already. So scaling companies, they're not, they need, of course, the right elements in your ecosystem to become successful. So basically what I'm saying is that in the tier 1 cities that are already a little bit further, even the tier 2 cities, that just go into the phase of growth, this becomes super, super important. But maybe it's also good to tell a little bit of backstory why we got into this webinar. It's because we see many activities that an ecosystem can undertake to start growing. But it's still a lot focused on basically growing your own companies, wherein attracting promising companies from other places of the world is, of course, the easier one. It takes less time. And there are not that many programs set up for that. Well, the soft landing program is getting more foot on the ground. But I still feel that after speaking with a lot of governments that it's a bit overlooked. And I think that's also the reason why it's interesting to put this topic a bit more on the table. And if you go into the next slide, I did some analysis on, okay, so hey, if you want to start attracting companies as an ecosystem, like how do you do it? What is the blueprint for it? So let me start with the reasons why you should actually go into a soft landing program or an attraction program. So in general, it's good for economic growth. You'll land more jobs into the industries that you focus your soft landing program in. You attract international talent, and you can attract companies from a certain industry. So become really good in one industry, maybe the industry that you defined when you assess your strengths and weaknesses. And of course, it's also really about telling the story, showcasing the success that you got with the companies that scaled into your ecosystem, which can be an example for young entrepreneurs, students, and so on. So that's a bit that when speaking to many ecosystems, this is basically always the reason why they start engaging with programs like this. And then if you look into the different programs, there are always three main ingredients for a soft landing program. So there is the design phase is of key importance. Because it needs to align with strategy. So talking about industry, but also talking about the sweet spot of companies that you want to attract. Looking at the local ecosystem to see what's already there, where is room for growth into the ecosystem. Align it with the local ecosystem as well. It's always better to do it with the ecosystem than to do it to the ecosystem, and really make sure you have a compelling proposition for startups or for the skills that you're trying to attract. So we're really trying to look into what do we have as an ecosystem, where are our strengths, and how can we leverage that the proposition to companies. And then of course it's about how do you get in these companies, right? It's the attraction phase. So how do you make sure that the good companies, the companies that have potential of succeeding, actually will find more opportunity? Yeah. There are of course many ways how to attract these companies. Next web, we helped, for instance, Seoul, as I mentioned, the case with that. There are of course many other ways how you can promote these opportunities. And you need to select the ones that have the potential of really becoming successful. And then last part is the soft landing phase, and there you really want to combine the local ecosystem with the companies that you're trying to get in. So it's interesting to mention that normally you would do this physically, but in the current situation with COVID, we actually see that doing digital matchmaking events, for instance, with the key corporates, with late-stage investors, with mentors that understand the culture, that also works really well. So you can actually do a digital soft landing. Then how does a program look like? The time span of this is around 6 months. It can be shorter, it can also be longer. It depends also a little bit on the maturity of companies that you want to go after. But this sets a little bit an idea of how you can actually run this in your ecosystem, how you can get started.
Arno, thank you so much for giving us a few initial insights about the programs you successfully execute in many places. Two things stand out for me. The one is, maybe three actually, industry alignment, a strategic alignment with an industrial and economic development strategy that makes sense for a particular location. Don't try to be the fifth or the 50th place in the world to address fintech or e-commerce if you are a manufacturing hub. That certainly is hugely important. Clear brand proposition. Scale-up companies are attractive everywhere, and there's competition for them and for their R&D development centers. So clear brand, clearly articulated story. Why should I go somewhere? Certainly important. Maybe some legal provisions around attracting these companies, whatever that might be. So really, thank you for giving us this umbrella, this understanding of what it could be, and I'm really excited to hear from Roger now how this comes into place and into play in Barcelona and Catalonia.
Thank you again, Stephan. Now what I'm going to try is to explain you our case. This is not for sure the best one. We have a lot to improve and to learn from others, but we have been ranked as a top 5 startup hub in Europe, and we consider that 5 elements are very relevant to create this ground and to promote this startup ecosystem when it comes to be a global leader and to be a good opportunity and destination for international startups. First of all, technology. We feel that it is compulsory to have an innovative ecosystem, to have a top technology centers, infrastructure in terms of, for instance, supercomputing centers, universities, preparing the professionals of the future, etc. So technology and innovation, first point. Second, industry. We are, as I was mentioning, one not only within Spain, but in Europe, one of the most industrialized regions. And we really want and need to still being like this. We are over the average in Europe in terms of industrial projects attracted every year. So our foreign investment is especially technological and industrial, and we want to remain like this. We want to be an industrial region, and because we think that this is very important for startups to be close to the industry, because only through this way they can have the proper exchanges of experiences, and startups will have the chance to cover the industrial requests and needs in the future. Talent, the most important, the key factor for the competitiveness. We are a nice region to live and work, and we have the quality of life that all of you probably well know. But we need to promote the local talent availability for foreign companies and for the local companies. And we are in the time of facing some challenges in terms of talent attraction from abroad into Catalonia. So we can discuss a little bit more afterwards. Location in terms not only of geostrategic position, but especially in terms of connectivity with the world. And here, just let me mention that we have two very important congresses, for instance. First one is Mobile World Congress, which allow Catalonia to be the mobile world capital, and that means that it is not only about having an important Congress, but what is happening around the mobility technologies during the whole year. And secondly, we have gained the Integrated System Europe Congress from Netherlands. It is supposed to be, or we are supposed to have the first edition this next June. Or July. I don't really manage the dates, but for us it's important to reach this and to gain these international congresses and fairs, because it is the opportunity to link Catalonia with the world, and the other way around, to showcase what is happening in Catalonia to the foreign companies and international startups. And 5 solutions. It couldn't be all what I'm explaining without public support, covering what the private industry and companies are already doing. But we need to provide with solutions from the public side in terms of preparing the ground, so infrastructures, 5G for companies, providing with for instance, with a proper tax regime, tech visas like France or Portugal has, etc. So creating and facilitating the ground, and also straight solutions to companies in terms of services for international investors. We have support. We provide with support in terms of business location, incentives, information and advisement, etc. So that will be my approach in this sense. Yes. I move forward. Why? I completely agree with what Arno was explaining in terms of the reasons why we should have or we have to have a soft landing program. For us, it's very important, as Arno was listing, the importance of having a program for international startups, soft landing program, because the international startups represent an economic growth for our region, also job creation and international talent attraction, because international startups make us or give us the possibility to lead the changes. We want the last and better technologies in our region. We want to attract the cutting edge technologies from the world, and because we want to lead the changes. So we need to be prepared for the future, and we want to be the champions in certain fields. And finally, to showcase the world that the new technologies, the last innovations are also happening in Catalonia. So we need to showcase. How do we do? With business-oriented policies from the public side, from the Catalan government. And what do we offer? A program that means two things. One, segmentation. All the international startups are very welcome to Catalonia, but we have to be proactive when it comes to go for inviting certain types of startups or projects. So we are segmenting the market and being proactive in this sense. And second, as I was mentioning, solutions for companies. We have to be able to put the international startups to bring them and to put them in contact with all the ecosystem, to generate the contacts, to provide with the spaces for the physical soft landing, etc. So that's the point, or that's where we are right now, Stephan.
We're very rounded program, so I'm delighted to hear, and it's reflecting of Arno's intro to the topic. Clear technology focus, undoubtedly. I think that's pretty obvious in Catalonia, and you've really built this brand proposition. Talent attraction, it is highly competitive, but in the end, talent follows these opportunities, and the more it is very clear. Why should I go? Not undoubtedly, there's a great lifestyle, there's a great cultural environment. That's a huge positive, but there's also a real technology angle that makes me as an ambitious software engineer really want to come. I think that's great to hear. You mentioned in the morning, Roger, I'm not entirely familiar with the example, but there are also some legal provisions. So if I, as a scale-up, want to come to Barcelona, to Catalonia, I might have the ability to tap into a certain sandbox environment or some legal environment that makes it a little bit easier to test, to pilot my new ideas. I think we typically come up with the idea of autonomous vehicles and the testing facilities that obviously need to be sandboxed to some regime. But I really liked these examples you were making. If you want to expand for a sec on those.
Yes, no. What I was explaining in the morning, in fact, is that maybe 10-15 years ago, when we start listening about startups or interesting initiatives in terms of entrepreneurship, etc., our main goal was how to react and how from the public side or how could so what was our role in terms of creating the field, not the ground, studying the who is who, trying to articulate the synergies with the private sector, start developing or implementing a public-private partnerships, but in fact creating the ground. And in the second, in the second part of the last decade, when we understood that the ecosystem and the ground was more or less created, we decided to start promoting these opportunities in terms of technology challenges in Catalonia, or explaining the needs of the big corporates in Catalonia, when they had some technology challenges and they need to do scouting, international scouting. So we decided to start explaining this to the world and going and participating and attending to international fairs, doing some road shows. We define a program so-called Road to Silicon Valley to go there and learn and explain as well what was happening in Catalonia. So international promotion, generally speaking. And now where we are now is in the moment of trying to be very, as I was mentioning, in fact, a few minutes ago, trying to be very proactive in terms of the product. So what we offer when an international startup decides to invest in Catalonia, we want to be very practical, trying to tap this international company into the ecosystem, offering all the spaces available, not only in the public buildings and spaces, but also introducing them to the co-workings, to incubators, even to contacting them with the big corporates, with tech challenges alive. And and as well, not only having very tangible products, but also going for a specific international startups that we feel that we really need to have in Catalonia, because they have an important technology, for instance, in terms of e-health or in terms of the mobility of the future, and that's it. So we try to provide with a very tangible products at this
I'm
moment.
glad to hear that, Roger. I think we need to make this very clear, because scale-up attraction sometimes is seen as, can I get scale-ups to set up an office? And then you come years later and you find sales offices where scale-ups rooted elsewhere, developing elsewhere, creating employment and benefits elsewhere, are basically selling into the local environment, into the corporates, but not necessarily really having the R&D, the intellectual property creation, etc. locally. So that's an important point. I'm glad you mentioned it, tapping it into the ecosystem, into a corporate and R&D environment, which allows a scale-up company to come and actually develop their product or adapt their product. Arno, I was wondering, corporate collaboration, one or two examples. I think in Seoul you might have seen the potential there to attracting scale-ups that are more than just sales offices of the UK or New York or whatever Singapore-based scaling company.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that fit really well into the position of scale-ups to enter a certain geography. I think that, of course, talent is number one, but the access to market can really help, especially when we're going into a different continent where you really have the opportunity to open up a regional or continental office. So I think what in Korea they did really well is they basically advocated with opening up the offices of LG, Samsung, Hyundai, and many more of their corporates. I think that having already that whole road opened and making sure in proposition that is part of the plan, that is super engaging for many of the companies. And we do that as ourselves as well. So our co-working spaces, we aim only for scale-ups, the top 10% scale-ups, which means that we also get a lot of applications from outside the Netherlands. So we have, for instance, a company that does cargo. It's, the name is slipped to me, but it's from the US, Flexport it was. And they opened up their EMEA office. And at some point, they also brought a part of the development team here. So it can also go basically hand in hand. We also saw the same thing with Uber. So Uber basically, we helped the lobby when Uber opened the office, their EMEA headquarters in Amsterdam. And that started off quite small with the core, and then at some point it starts also to get a lot of other roles as well. So I think Uber also has quite some IP created in Amsterdam. So in general, we see that access to market often can be a starting point for also other functions to grow, or basically that have more added value to the ecosystem, so to say.
If I sum the two of you up in a sense, access to market is the starting point, but if I get the ingredients right, the environment, to Roger's point, I got talent, I got access to R&D facilities, I got 5G testing grounds, or whatever the technology might be, they might actually come, they might sell, but they also will start develop, and then we get the real value creation. That's, yeah, I think that's a really good formula. And to package all of that into a crisp brand proposition that you actually can tell the story to a US, to a Canadian, to an entrepreneur from Latin America who is not as familiar as we are over here with our locations. That's certainly a very important message, and TNW FT obviously in a prime spot to carry the message as well. To move us on a little bit, and first of all, I wanted to say, if the audience is interested in any questions, please use the Q&A. We will try our best to pick them up in the limited time we've got. We'll come back to you afterwards. But I'd like to move us a little bit to the next topic. In the end, particularly as policymakers, we are dealing with large government budgets, taxpayers' money, etc. Have to be accountable. We need to measure success. We need to be transparent about what's happening, and be really interested to see from you, Roger, but also from you, Arno, what do you think about how do I measure actually my status? Where am I? Am I attractive enough? Where are my gaps? Which approaches have you considered taking to see if all what you put in place really pays off?
Okay, I'm going to start saying that we cannot answer if we are attracting enough startups or not. What it is absolutely clear to us is that we want more startups and scale-ups, and ideally unicorns in Catalonia. And so that's why around 10 years ago, after being more than 25 years with foreign investment attraction activity, with offices in a different international markets, etc., we create the Startup Catalonia. Startup Catalonia is a division within the agency, only devoted to assisting international startups, and only focus on or especially focus on making the ecosystem more vibrant and more international. And so that's the point. We absolutely know that we want more startups because of the reasons already mentioned before. And how do we measure? So we know three things. We cannot measure with the same scope, no, that we measure the traditional foreign investment. We cannot measure with the same variables one unicorn or a startup as we measure, I don't know, the projects of Amazon in Catalonia. No? So we need different variables to be considered and a specific approach. What we measure, what we traditionally measure when it comes to a traditional investment project, for instance, manufacturing plant or a digital hub, etc., we specifically take into account job creation and investment amount, CapEx. But when it's referring to startups, we try to put in the mix more variables. For instance, the new technologies attracted to Catalonia that can represent an improvement and an upgrade of a certain industry. For instance, the case I was mentioning of the mobility of the future, or what is happening in Catalonia currently and all the world in general in terms of the health of the future. No? So that drives me to the second idea. It is not everything about quantity, but especially about quality. We, and Stephan, you were putting the case. We don't. Commercial offices and subsidiaries are very welcome, but we need added value. We need startups providing us with added value. So we look for quality. And finally, we consider that having an important startup ecosystem and international startups exchanging experience and roles and projects with the local companies generates a very important positive side effects. For instance, to put Catalonia in the loop of the big companies and representing us the opportunity to as I'm saying, to be in the loop of these big companies and try to reach more projects from them in the coming future. No, so it's like showcasing Catalonia in front of these big companies, which are our most important targets. So that will be my approach in this sense. I don't know, Arno, if you. I'm sure that you have more mathematical and scientific way of measuring.
Yes, maybe it's good to also answer one question. I just did that by typing, but I think it's maybe good to highlight that one. So how can a city build out an industry cluster or a corporate cluster that is willing to build partnership with startups? What's the case that if you've witnessed of this partnership, how long does it take? So I think it's a really interesting question. It's from Derek Pam. And what I like about it is that, yeah, you're completely in the right direction. So what we always do is one of the strong things in the propositions is if you have a strong automotive industry and you can engage with them, if you have a strong banking industry, like say Frankfurt, it's really great if you can bring that network together. Then the second step is to make sure that you dig up the actual challenges of those companies. So what are their strategic focuses for the upcoming years? Where do they want to invest in? Is automotive, for instance, in the upcoming years mostly driven by AI? Well, then you find the challenges of those companies and you start looking predominantly for AI companies. Or even try to find those companies that have that can build a direct business relation with the challenges of the companies that you speak to. Because then you start basically, then it starts almost becoming matchmaking, and then you unlock the true value and all the reason for a company to not just come to a soft landing for a couple of days, but really build out their business. Program like that, all in all, would probably take 6 to 9 months to go from the start to the end. So really interesting question. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think it's worth answering that one. Then Roger, I think, yeah, about the mathematics. I mean, I think we're not in the end not the data party in this panel, but we did definitely made an attempt or starting point basically on how should you measure success of a soft landing and how can it get to the how can you make the money back? So we made a theoretical case. This is for Valencia, and basically what we looked into. Okay, so where is the direct payback? So it's in job creation. So we looked at our own co-working space in Amsterdam and basically looked into all the international companies that we got in. And we witnessed that 30% was able to grow their team from 5 to 100 people. So for instance, the companies that I just mentioned, those were one of the top 30%. Then you have just companies from abroad that do really well, they scaled, but they basically don't exceed a successful sales office. You also have those cases, and often you don't know up front. And then you also have 40% that just didn't really got foot on the ground. So in all fairness, Stripe also was part of our co-working space, and they didn't succeed. So that's, and even the most promising one, sometimes it just doesn't really work. So things like that happen. But then if you calculate, like if you make a certain amount of hires, you get a certain amount of jobs. What happens if you start calculating what, for instance, the average employee cost is? And if you check then what flows back into the ecosystem in terms of cost of living, taxes. Yeah, you can, of course, you can play around with these numbers, but these are things that have direct impact into the economy. And if you then look into what a program in quite lean form costs to just set something up, I mean, we took the 200K mark as an example, that the return on investment in just 2 years, this is in 3 years, is already 15 times the investment. So also a bit to trigger the conversation, like these type of programs, it has so much value for your ecosystem that, yeah, it's, and if you don't do it and your neighbor city is doing it and basically steals your companies away, I think then you lose double. So it's, I think, yeah, we see these things happening more and more. But it's also a little bit like, yeah, it's a boat to jump on, because otherwise, yeah, it's you will fall a little bit behind in this on this topic. So yeah, go ahead, Stephan.
Thank you for sharing the example of Valencia here, which gives us a real life case. I think I presented one in the beginning as well. Just we are singing the same song here, really. Yeah. Make it very, very clear what the economic impact is, and it's possibly even broader than direct employment. If you bring scale-ups, you bring knowledge, you bring global connectivity, global market relationships into your city, into your environment. The trigger effects, it's almost like an avalanche effect. So when we came up with this idea from 1,600 to nearly 100,000 jobs, this is not total fantasy. These are actually mathematical models that show how the different factors build upon each other. It's an enormous value creation when it happens properly. But also, of course, to keep track of different developments, to have a look what's really happening when these scale-ups come in, or how is the growth of local scale-ups affected, and really have different KPIs and some tracking over time to really understand the dynamics and counteract. Yeah, nothing worse than a lot of marketing and attraction effort is being done, and we have realized that we don't have the technical talent that's required, and we are running into constraints here, and the entire thing falls together as a house of cards.
And on top of it, I think that as these programs are, well, also for some cities still new, I think it's also a way to put it on the agenda. I mean, make sure the decision making within municipalities goes smoother, because these are the business cases often needed to get things approved or to start a program like this. So I think it's also for everybody here that sees the value, but is a little bit like not sure how I'm going to make this case. Well, this is just one way to calculate it, and it's definitely not taking all the factors into account, but it's already a first step, and you can broaden it out with all the sub effects that it will have.
Got a provocative question from our audience. Really like it. It's anonymous, but we should pick it up. I think I would love your thoughts. So let me read it out. If every city tries to attract scale-ups, how do we build a regional ecosystem? Does it not just become a zero-sum game? So are we all competing as hard as we can, but we are not creating value in aggregate? Personally, I have a view on that, but maybe Roger and Arno, you have just one sentence of perspective. Barcelona, are you just competing with Frankfurt, London, and Singapore, or is there more in the sum of all these efforts?
I would like to listen to Arno, but we are for sure we are competing, but I think that we perfectly know who are the leaders, the big leaders, and what we have to do is to learn from them and to be able to put also on the table our main assets and our values as a region. We don't have the same way to understand the work. We don't have the same way of understanding the life in general, and so we are different, and companies have to choose at the very end, and we only have to learn from the very best and the global leaders and try to compete, but also cooperate with them in order to each of us stay improving our tools, our strategies. And yeah, I understand. I answer the question like this. I don't know, Arno, you have more different experiences with different regions. I don't know.
I think first of all, super interesting question. I like this challenge as well. I think that cities and regions, they often wear multiple hats. So if basically, and let me give you an example from the Netherlands. So to the rest of the world, we're trying to position the Netherlands as one. So then it doesn't matter if you go to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Den Haag, and we are happy already if we can be united. So there we're really looking into how can we position it to the outside world as one strong coalition. But then if we talk about talent, and often basically a lot of talent gets to Amsterdam, then sometimes Rotterdam feels like, well, then Rotterdam and Amsterdam are a bit competing. So there are different layers how you can look into competition. I think that in these type of soft landings, I think it would be even stronger to not do it just from your city, or even to organize this on national level and basically do different verticals. And for instance, say vertical 1 goes to Barcelona, vertical 2 is more on the maritime, and that goes to Valencia, and then vertical 3 is more on the fintech, and that goes to Madrid. There are multiple ways how to explore it, but yeah, I think there's no one clear answer, and it really depends on the situation.
Arno, let me take it maybe even a little more macro. That's first principles. Then I think when you think about innovation and really value creation in tech, there's a very, very strong correlation between diversity, the very diverse teams, not just female and male, really diverse backgrounds. So if we are enabling scale-up companies to touch into multiple geographies, multiple jurisdictions, multiple cultures, you can be relatively sure, and I think we can mathematically provide evidence that the rate of innovation, factor productivity that comes with that is going up. And that's in aggregate at the end, always a good thing for mankind and humankind. It might be the one or other city that outcompetes its neighbors for a while, but I think in aggregate, to answer that question, I wouldn't be fearful that we are playing a zero-sum game here. Certainly not. In aggregate, we are playing certainly a game that is adding value over time, and the evolution of the startup ecosystem, as simple as that, is maybe the value creation is maybe a very obvious answer to it. But I really love the question. So in summary, to attract unicorn scaling companies, but also to provide the right environment, I think we should take away the right environment from a technical perspective. A look at industrial sector specializations that are really attractive. Don't be jack of all trades to everybody, but rather find a proposition that's reasonable, that really speaks to the city, the region. Get the house in order in terms of attractive support mechanisms, working spaces, soft landing programs, etc. Legal provisions, sandboxes, we touched upon it, but also package it all up in a compelling story, because in the end, the startup scale-up founders that are looking around the world for the next opportunity to expand their business, that's what a scale-up, that's what makes a scale-up. And they will possibly not spend an awful lot of time with one city alone, but they will really be looking for what are the most attractive locations. So really forming this story, really clear proposition, and tell it to the world. Certainly also something that's incredibly important. Thank you, Arno, for joining us and for helping so many of our member network cities in telling this story so well. And Roger, for sharing the insight and all the work you've done over the 10, 15 years in Catalonia. We certainly have been tracking the progress of Barcelona, and it has been impressive. There's no doubt. Thanks so much for joining us. For the audience, thank you very much for being with us today, and follow up if you got questions. If you want to get into contact with either Roger or Arno, Adam and I are most happy to take your questions and carry on the conversation. Thank you very much for tonight, and I hand it back to Adam.
Thank you very much.
First off, yeah, thanks Roger and Arno and Stephan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, everyone will receive the presentation slides and the recording, and we hope to see you at our next ecosystem development webinar on the 6th of April, where we'll have the CEO and founder of Dealroom, Joran Wingard, talking about the topic of using a cloud-based data platform to track and support your startup ecosystem. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.